This episode of Lex Out Loud is brought to you by my patrons, readers, and listeners. If you'd like to learn how to support this podcast, visit lexstarwalker.com/support. Hello and welcome to episode 52 of Lex Out Loud, writing science fiction. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker. This show is a chronicle of my journey as a science fiction novelist. Hello and welcome back to the show, everyone. Welcome to Lex Out Loud. I am Lex and I'm really loud. But yeah, it's great to be back. It's been a little bit for me. I think it's only been a week for you, but I had some episodes produced and in the can, and then I took a week off of Lex Out Loud to do an episode of my other podcast, Game Master's Journey, which I had ended before I started this show a little over a year ago, and decided that I would return to it and relaunch it. So yeah, I did, I think it was episode 288 of Game Master's Journey. And yeah, we're going to do these periodically, kind of switch between the two as needed. But yeah, it's really fun to get back to it. And I think there's going to be quite a bit of crossover between the two shows. One of the topics that I want to dig into a bit more in the future, hopefully in the near future on both shows, is my recent discovery of how much is the same between being a GM of a tabletop role-playing game and being a writer, especially if you approach things more as a discovery writer. Yeah, it's really interesting to me, and only very recently have I come to realize how similar those two things are. And in fact, they're in many ways exactly the same. So I thought it would be a fun topic for both shows, do some crossover. So as far as announcements and whatnot at the beginning of the show today, I've been really busy lately. Finally got the second draft done of my book, and I've started sending it out to some alpha readers, which involved some logistics with that and getting some things ready for sending to alpha readers. So I've been doing that kind of stuff, and I put quite a bit of time into the upcoming Pitch Wars event that was coming in June, which really briefly, there's various events like this, different kinds of things. And what Pitch Wars was an event where someone who's writing a novel could, basically it's kind of like a contest, and you could win a mentor who is a published writer or an editor or, some kind of professional in the publishing field, who would then look over your novel and help you and give you feedback and all that stuff. And then this would culminate in what they called an agent showcase, where they would take all these novels that had been mentored, and they would post the pitch for them, which is like your elevator pitch, on a page, and agents could go check that out and maybe find some novels that way. So it was a way for someone like me to get my novel possibly in front of some agents without burning any bridges, without actually submitting to those agents. So I'm not ruining any future chance I might have with them. So it's a really cool thing. And the next showcase, the next chance to get a mentor was coming in June. And so they had listed all the various mentors that were available. And just the fact that I'm writing sci-fi, I think narrowed that pretty large list down to, I don't know, it was like 20 or so different writers. And then I went and checked out their blogs and all this stuff and did research into all these writers to find the mentors I wanted. I found these two women who were working together as a team that just seemed like a perfect fit for what I wanted to do. They're really into space stuff, space stories that take place in space. And they seemed really cool, really great senses of humor. And I just felt like they would be two people who would like what I had done and would be great people to mentor me. And I was really looking forward to that. And I put a lot of hours into doing all this. And literally just a few days after I finally got all this done, I found out that Pitch Wars is going bye-bye. It's not going to happen anymore. The people that run it are just overworked, I think. And with the pandemic and everything else, it just became too much. I think they've been doing it for I forget how many years. They've been doing it for quite a while. And it was all a volunteer thing. None of these people got paid for their time. And so, I totally get it. That things can't last forever. But the timing for me personally was really terrible because I just put all this time into it. And I was really excited about potentially working with these two ladies. And now it's not going to happen. So, I don't know if you'd call that a setback or not. Definitely psychologically, it feels like a bit of a setback. But there are quite a few other events like this. There's one, I can't remember names off the top of my head, but there's one that's actually specific to science fiction and fantasy that's similar. And there are some others. So, it wasn't the only opportunity like this. It was just that I'd already put so much time in it and I was really excited about it and looking forward to it. And it also just worked well with my time frame because I figured by June, I would definitely, have gotten feedback from my alpha readers and done another revision. And, by June, I might have even gotten it in front of some beta readers. So I felt like June would be a really good time to do this, that it would be, it would be really well polished by then. The one that's specific to sci-fi and fantasy is actually happening later this month. I'm recording in February. And unfortunately, that's just too soon for me. I mean, I have a second draft, but I really, it's not, I'm not ready to put this in front of an agent potentially yet. And that's where they really need to be for these kinds of things. You need to be ready. So if an agent is interested, you can send them a manuscript that's ready for an agent. And mine isn't. It's only on the second draft. So that one happens twice a year, I think. So, it's February now. So if it's every 6 months, that would be around August that it would happen again, which that would be fine. Maybe by then I'll have gone through the alphas and the betas and be sitting pretty as far as the state of my manuscript at that point. So yeah, that's what I've been doing. And there have been some other things taking up my time lately. My wife and I recently decided that we're going to move again. I feel like I'm moving all the time, but we're really excited about it. It's definitely going to be an upgrade in our living situation by a huge margin. But as any of you know who's ever done it, moving is a lot of work. And so we're just starting that process now. And also there's just a lot of stuff that we've accumulated over the years that we don't use or don't need, that I think it's been at least 2 years. I've been building this list of stuff I want to sell on Craigslist. But I've just been putting it off because I knew it would be, a pain in the ass and I didn't want to do it. But now that this is happening, I'm kind of I'm out of time to put that off. It needs to get done. So just yesterday I listed 6 things on Craigslist. The good news is a lot of the stuff is, not crazy expensive, but over $100 is what I'm selling stuff for. I've got some musical instruments and various audio electronic gear. I've got old PlayStation 4. So I've just got quite a few things that if I can sell them, it'll be a decent amount of money to help us with our expenses for this big change coming. So in that regard, it's really cool if I can actually find buyers. But yeah, it just takes time and it's kind of tedious. And honestly, I thought that the worst part would be just listing everything on Craigslist, like taking the pictures and making the posts and all that. But now that I've listed some stuff, I'm starting to realize that I think actually the worst part is going to be dealing with all the people that respond to these posts. I've had, I think, 4 responses already, and 3 of the 4 were just utter nonsense, wasting my time. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, who are these people on Craigslist? But yeah, so that could be a bit of a pain in the butt, but I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully I can sell some of this stuff because I don't really want to have to move all this stuff that I don't use and don't need or want anymore. And it's all like nice things. Like one is this acoustic guitar we got from my wife that, I mean, she hardly played it at all. I mean, it looks brand new. It's in great shape. It's a beautiful guitar. And it's like, you know, I have my own acoustic guitar, so I don't need it or want it. And it's just sitting here, not doing anyone any good. So it'd be really nice to get it in the hands of someone who needs and wants something like that and get some of our money back for it. That'd be really sweet. So yeah, I've been busy with that kind of stuff. So started to get a little frustrated, honestly, because I really wanted to be working on my next book by now. And just all the stuff, doing the revision and then getting ready for alpha readers and figuring out how I was going to find alpha readers and, you know, how I was going to handle all that. It's just taken a lot of time and mental bandwidth. And yeah, I just haven't had a lot of time or space to work on or think about the next book. And I'm starting to get kind of frustrated with that. But you know, all that's done now. I've sent the book out to the first alpha. I have a couple more in the works. So yeah, I mean, I've got stuff to deal with the move and all of that. But other than that, I should be able to find some time to start working on the next book, which I'm really excited about. And what's really funny, and I think I've talked about this on the show before, I'm really, really excited about the third book. So I think that's not an unheard of thing with writers. When you're writing a series, you're more excited for a book further down the line than the one you're writing right now. But yeah, I really, the third, what I'm thinking is going to be the third book. The main character of that book is a character that I introduce about halfway through the book I just wrote, the first book. And I just really like the character, and I think it's going to be really fun to tell a story with her as the main character. And it also, I don't know, the third book, it could possibly be a mystery. It could possibly be a thriller. I don't have a lot of experience with either. So I'm kind of, I kind of dig the idea of trying to do one of those things and do something different. So that's kind of appealing about it. But yeah, and I'm still, you know, with the second book, I'm still not 100% sure what I want to do with it. I think I know what I want to do. I'm just, I'm not 100% sure, but I've talked about that before. So yeah, that's where I'm at. Oh, and speaking of alpha readers and beta readers, I just recently did an episode of this show where I talked about alpha and beta readers and what those terms mean, at least to me. If you're wanting to know more about that, you can check that out. But I am looking for alpha and beta readers. So if you're interested in doing that, I do need some more. So for an alpha reader, I really am looking for people who are themselves writers or editors. So that if that's you and you want to alpha read, that would be fantastic. Beta readers can really be anyone who likes to read. And is, you know, if you haven't read a novel in 10 years, you probably wouldn't be the best beta reader. But if you're someone who at least occasionally reads novels, you know, at least a few a year, especially if you're in the science fiction and you read science fiction, you'd be a great beta reader. But honestly, as long as I can get a good number of beta readers, I would not mind having a few beta readers that don't so much read sci-fi, just to get the perspective of someone where sci-fi isn't normally their thing, to see if maybe they can enjoy it anyway. But yeah, anyone who reads, especially if you read sci-fi, could be a beta reader. Basically what you do, and you can refer to the episode for more, but you just read the early draft and give me your feedback on it. So, the alpha readers are reading the second draft, depending how many I get and how long the process takes. Some of them may end up reading a third draft instead of a second. The betas will read probably like a fourth or a fifth draft. So the betas are getting something closer to what the finished book will be, but it will not be the finished book, because part of the whole point of beta readers is to then take the feedback and improve it before, we say this is the final version. So if that's something you'd be interested in, head to the show notes at lexstarwalker.com/LOL for this episode 52. And I have a link to a post on my blog that tells you more about alpha and beta reading, or you can just go to my blog and find it. It'll be towards the top unless you're in the future. And it tells you a little bit about kind of what's involved and kind of what I would expect from you. And then there's a questionnaire for alpha and for beta readers for you to fill out to let me know that you're interested and let me know a little bit more about you and your tastes as far as reading. And yeah, there's a separate form for alphas and a separate for betas. So just fill out the appropriate form, and then, yeah, I'll probably be getting in touch with you if you seem like what I'm looking for. So yeah, I appreciate everyone who volunteers to do that. Will definitely be a huge help in this whole process. So today I wanted to talk about a subject that's very near and dear to my heart, and something that I think has always been important, but now it's becoming much more obvious how important this is. And that's checking your sources, which is to say, when you are getting information, finding out where that information is coming from and whether it's information that's really reliable, that's accurate, that's something that you can believe or trust, or whether it's complete nonsense. So not only is this important for just everyone in just daily life, for example, separating information from misinformation when it comes to things like COVID, vaccines, and climate change. There's a lot of nonsense out there. Any moron can post their opinion on Twitter or Facebook. Anyone can have a blog. Anyone can have a YouTube channel. There are no gatekeepers. There's no quality control. There's no one that verifies that what people put on the internet or on YouTube or anywhere else is true or legitimate or anything like that. So anyone can put any kind of nonsense up that they want. And there's just a lot of nonsense out there, whether you're talking about climate change or COVID-19 or vaccines or what's healthy and unhealthy to eat, or how you should exercise, or just really almost any topic you could think of. There are a lot of people out there with websites and YouTube channels and blogs who don't know the first thing what they're talking about and are acting like they're experts and trying to tell you what they think you should do. And it's all fantasy. So, it's really important to be able to tell if something is legitimate or not, if something is backed by science and research or not, if something is a fact, or if it's just something someone believes or wishes were true. That's an important skill for anyone to have in this day and age. But it's also really important to us as writers specifically. So there are two main areas that I can think of as a writer where this is really important. And that's, the first is when you're doing research for your novels. So, if you write science fiction like I do, You're probably going to need to do a good amount of research for the world building of your novel, and even just writing the novel. You might need to research things in physics and how things in physics work. You might need to research astronomy, how far is one star from another star, things like that. You might be in your world building, you might be researching technology and the evolution of societies and history and all this stuff to try to create your world in the future. Even as a fantasy writer, you're probably going to be doing lots of research, not so much into astronomy and physics and things like that and technology, but you'll be doing research into history and old forms of technology, like technology they had in the Middle Ages and things like that. So even a writer of contemporary fiction, you're probably going to have to do some kind of research for your book, whether you maybe have a character who uses a gun and you need to research how guns work, or you have a character that rides a horse and you need to research how horses work. So research is something that almost all of us do as writers on the regular, and probably all of us will do it at some point in our projects. So that's one area where you really want to be sure that you're getting good information and information that's accurate and true, so you don't make a fool of yourself and have inaccuracies in your book that people are going to spot when they read it, and it's going to kick them out of the story. I see this in sci-fi all the time, especially, space opera, where, maybe people don't do a lot of research, or they don't do as much as they should, or maybe they're researching things in physics, but not really understanding it completely. And, it does kick you out of the story a bit when you see something in a book and you're like, yeah, that's not how the universe works. It does mess with your suspension of disbelief. And, that's the thing is you never know who's reading your book, and there are experts of everything under the sun out there, so you never know when someone reading your book is an expert on something like horses or firearms or nuclear fusion or whatever. And you just make some offhanded statement in your book and it's completely false and kind of ruins it for that person. I'm not going to name any names, but, actually, there's been a couple books that I've read in recent, in the last couple years since I've really been working on this project. And as you know, if you listen to season 1 of the show, I did a lot of research into space stations, and specifically space stations using rotation for artificial gravity and how that works and the physics of it and how they would be built and all this stuff. And there's been at least 2 books that I can think of off the top of my head that I've read in the last couple years that used space stations and or spaceships that rotated for gravity that got things really wrong as far as how that works. And, I don't really know, because I've done so much research into it. I don't really know if just an average person reading that would catch it and would realize that that isn't right. But I certainly did. And it definitely, the book lost a little credibility, and the story lost some credibility when all of a sudden, something is happening that's not how rotational gravity works. So yeah, you want to avoid that kind of stuff as much as you can. And, one way that you can get into trouble is if you're doing your quote research online and you're getting your information from someone's blog or Wikipedia or something like that, and you're actually getting information that isn't correct, that's false, and you don't know that it's false and you think it's correct, and you're using it in your story, and then people reading your story who do know about that thing realize that you don't know what you're talking about. So at the least, that would be pretty embarrassing, and it could even lead to people not wanting to finish the book and not wanting to read more of your books. So that's one big area, just doing research for yourself, for your novel, to learn more about whatever you need to know about. Maybe you have like for instance, in my novel I just wrote, I have some scenes taking place in hospitals and on future equivalents of ambulances and things like that. Now, luckily for me, I have actual experience in those environments, so I didn't actually have to research that. I just relied on what I knew from my own personal experience. But those would be things that if I didn't have that knowledge, I would have needed to research. How does an emergency room work? How does an ambulance work? What are the procedures that are followed in those situations? Things like that, so that can be as realistic as possible. So the other area where this is relevant as a writer is when it comes to finding advice or tips or instruction on how to be a better writer. Just like doing your research, if you're going to go, sit at the knees of a master and learn writing from someone, whether it's on a YouTube video or on a blog or you're going to go to a workshop or whatever it is, you need to know that this person actually knows what they're talking about. You can't just assume because someone made a YouTube video or they have a blog or they're teaching a workshop that they know what they're talking about or that they're the kind of writer that you want to emulate, because there's a lot of different styles of writing out there. And, if you're wanting to do literary fiction and you're reading a blog post by someone who writes, graphic novels, their thoughts and advice might not be the best things for you, might not be super relevant for you. But if you don't know that, if you just assume that they're a literary writer like you with the same goals and the same outlooks on what makes good writing versus not so good writing, if you just assume that you're on the same page, you could get a little waylaid by that. So, whether you're looking for advice or tips on writing, editing, publishing, finding an agent, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And again, really for anything in life, when you're looking for information, you always want to find out, where is this information coming from? Is it a legitimate source? Is it a trustworthy source? Is this someone that actually knows what they're talking about? Is this someone who knows more than I do about whatever this subject is? And this is especially true online because, at least if you're reading a printed book, some kind of nonfiction book, usually if it's a major publisher, if it was published by some publisher you never heard of that doesn't have much of a catalog, then who knows? But if it's a book published by a major publisher, then, there was some vetting that went into that book. They don't let just anyone write a book like that. Like this person who wrote the book has at least some kind of qualification saying that they're an expert, or at least someone who knows what they're talking about on the topic, whatever it is. But again, when it comes to the internet, there's none of that. There's no authority that someone has to go through to put a page on the internet. Anyone can do it. So you have to do your own due diligence to find out, where is this information coming from? You always want to ask, does this person know what they're talking about? Where are they getting their information? Are they presenting opinions as facts? Because that's something you see a lot in social media and online in general, is people will present their opinions and their beliefs as if they're facts. And some people, honestly, I don't think understand the difference between an opinion, a belief, and a fact. They're very different things. Also, another thing to look out for is, just because someone says in an article or something that something is, quote, scientific or, quote, proved by science, it doesn't mean that's true. Just because they put those magic little buzzwords in there doesn't mean it's actually supported by science, doesn't mean it's scientific. There's this whole thing out there called pseudoscience. When I was in school, I had numerous lectures specifically just on pseudoscience and how to spot pseudoscience, because what pseudoscience does is try to masquerade bullshit as science. So, you'll find this, like, you go to a flat earth convention or something like that. You'll see loads and loads of pseudoscience or people who think that the moon landing didn't happen. A lot of, I don't know what you call them, but like religious scientists that are trying to, quote, use science to prove their religious ideas. Yeah, you'll find a lot of pseudoscience and those kinds of arena. And being able to tell the difference between science and pseudoscience is its own topic. And I'm sure you do a Google search, you can find all kinds of information on that. But yeah, just because an article claims that it's scientific or that this is all based in science or comes from studies, doesn't necessarily mean it's true. You got to check up on that. So the question you ask when you see an article that says, science tells us this, or studies have shown that blah, blah, blah. The question you want to ask yourself and ask this article is, where does this information come from? Any kind of article or anything like that, making a claim like that, even a YouTube video, making a claim that this is supported by science, should have references. So if it's an article, it should right there where they state it, have a link to the study that they're claiming supports this. Or at the end of the article, they should have a references section. Or if it's a YouTube video, they should have links in the description of the video. It's amazing. I was just watching a video on writing lately where this woman was making all these claims about writing and how readers interact with stories that they read and what catches their attention and whatnot. And she made all these claims that all of this is based on psychological studies and psychology and all this stuff, and yet didn't provide one single reference to support any of that. So, maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. We have no way of knowing and no way of learning that, because if this person actually had sources for this information, it was legitimate, she didn't share them. And, when you're in a situation like that, you got to ask yourself, okay, if this person is making these claims and they have evidence to support these claims, good evidence, why aren't they sharing that evidence? Now, it could be they're just lazy, in which case it's probably not a great source for information anyway. You don't want to get your information from someone who's too lazy to even share their sources. But more likely, the reason is because they don't have legitimate sources. They're just regurgitating something that they heard anecdotally, but they don't have any actual evidence to back it up. So usually if someone is making claims like that and there really is evidence to back it up, they will give you the evidence or tell you where you can find it. If they don't, that's a huge red flag. So even if they do share that, so maybe you're reading, let's continue the example. You're reading an article on writing who's making all these claims about how, readers are attracted to stories and what things in a story will hook a reader's interest, and claiming that that this information is coming from psychology studies and whatnot. And they do, at the end of the article, link to those studies. You should still, if this is something you're really going to base something important on, and this is something that matters to you, the fact that they give that information, it still isn't enough. You need to go verify that. Go read the actual study or go read the article that they're referring to and see if it really says what they say it says. And, that might seem like a waste of time or like, why do you need to do that? But, it's amazing. I can't tell you how many articles I've read about science fiction ideas, like, say, for instance, warp drive, like whether or not warp drive is possible, or whether or not traveling through wormholes would be possible, where I'll read an article and it's on a legitimate like magazine or news site or something about like that, where someone is writing this article about how, traveling through wormholes could be possible, or building a warp drive could be possible. And they will be referencing a physics paper, or maybe more than one physics paper that they're basing all this on. And then I go read the actual physics paper, and the physics paper doesn't say that at all. And usually, in fact, in all the instances I remember where this has happened, what's going on is the person writing the article didn't really understand what the physics paper was saying, and they made false conclusions or came to false conclusions because they didn't really understand what the paper was saying. It's amazing how often that happens. So, even, you might even read something on a legitimate seeming site like CNN or something. It still doesn't necessarily mean that the person writing that article actually knows what they're talking about, even if they are referencing a paper or something that you can go read, you should still go check it out, because at least in the realm of sci-fi and physics, it's amazing how many journalists out there don't understand physics at all, and yet they think they can write these articles about these physics papers that come out, and they just spread a lot of misinformation. Then you have people who write articles based on those articles that are even more out in left field and not at all supported by the study that they're all supposedly talking about. So you got to be careful with that kind of thing. So in one of my classes, I'm pretty sure it was one of my psychology classes in college, the professor gave an excellent lecture on this topic. And it was for us doing research for a paper or something that we were supposed to do for the class. And the whole lecture was about, how do you find good information? And it was specifically about finding information online. And, how do you find the good stuff, and how do you avoid all the nonsense? So there are a couple kind of little shortcuts that I learned from that can help you out, that really stuck with me. So one of those is to look at the domain of the website where the article or whatever it is at. That can tell you a little bit all by itself. If the website address, if the URL ends in .gov, .gov, or .edu, then chances are good that it's trustworthy. Those sites are generally trustworthy because, unlike other websites, a government site or an educational site, a .edu is usually a site for a university or something like that. There is some vetting going on there. Not just anybody can post anything on a government site or an educational site. Now, it doesn't mean you can just assume that everything on there is 100% accurate, but it's a lot more trustworthy than other sites. On the other hand, information on sites ending in .com or .net or all the other various things should always be approached with skepticism. Oftentimes, especially the .com sites, these are companies and websites that are trying to sell you something. For example, there are loads and loads of sites out there with all kinds of nonsense articles on nutrition and healthy living and stuff like that. And they're all websites that are wanting to sell you dietary supplements like vitamins or minerals or, nutritional shakes or something like that. Or they're selling books or videos or courses, things like that. And that's a really huge one. The, nutrition. I remember taking a class in college and trying to do a paper on nutrition. And there are just so many totally bogus sites out there that are really just out there to sell you their products, but they have all these articles to support, why their products are awesome. And actually, this isn't in my notes, but I just remembered this. Another thing, especially with that specifically, when it comes to things like nutrition, diet, exercise, healthy living, things like that, also be cautious when they bring in a doctor. And, like maybe you're on some website that sells supplements and you're reading some article about, magnesium and how magnesium will just cure everything wrong in your life if you just get enough magnesium. And they've got some doctor on there talking about it. Just because someone has an MD after their name doesn't necessarily mean they know what they are talking about when it comes to that specific topic. Because the thing is there are a lot of specialties within medicine, and your general MD, like the doctor you go see when you have a cold, like a general practitioner, primary physician, that kind of doctor, as part of their training to become a doctor, they don't really have to learn much or even anything about nutrition. So, unless that doctor specializes in nutrition or specialized in nutrition when they were in school, they don't necessarily know that much about it. They're certainly not an authority on it. They're not an expert on it. And it's like that with a lot of things. There are a lot of specialties within medicine. So just because someone's an MD, just because they're a doctor, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're an expert on that specific topic. So that's something to look out for too. For instance, the pandemic thing right now, right? COVID-19. So COVID-19 is a virus. So one of the best people to, some of the best specialists to hear talk about COVID-19 would be an epidemiologist or a virologist. Oh, I always have problems with that. Virologist. Someone who specifically specializes in viruses or epidemics, contagious diseases. They're going to know more about it than a doctor who is specialized in nutrition or in sports medicine or something like that, which is not to say that they don't know anything, which is not to say they don't know more than the average person. I mean, they probably do, but they're not necessarily the authority on the topic. So yeah, .com sites, .org sites you want to be skeptical of. Ask yourself, what is this site? What's their agenda? Are they trying to sell me a bunch of stuff? Then that makes it really suspect, because you can't necessarily trust what they're telling you if they're trying to sell you stuff. So anytime you're dealing with someone wanting your money, that person has an agenda, and you definitely want to verify any claims that they make. Now, sites ending in .org can kind of go either way. So this is a site run by an organization, and it could be great, it could be terrible. So you need to research the actual organization running the site. Who are they? What do they stand for? What kind of standards do they have? Things like that. What's their agenda? So that's all kind of more toward the, doing research for your book kind of stuff, or just research for life in general. But when it comes to writing advice or publishing advice or anything like that, it's all the same things apply. You want to ask yourself, who is this person? Are they really an expert? What makes them an expert? Do they know what they're talking about? So some things here to look out for. And this is kind of a bit of a newer thing, but you might, especially on like social media, like Twitter or Facebook or something like that, you might see some writer get on a soapbox and say all these things about how you should write or how you should do this or that. And you're like, well, who is this person? And it's like, oh, well, they have a book published. So they must know what they're talking about, right? They have a book published. Well, not necessarily anymore, unfortunately, because the thing is anyone, and I mean anyone, can independently publish any book that they write. So just the fact that they have a book in print or an ebook with their name on it does not mean necessarily that they know the first thing about writing. Anybody can publish a book independently. There are no gatekeepers there. There's no guarantee of any level of quality whatsoever there. So you want to go look up the book that they publish or the books and find out who is the publisher. So, if you go to Amazon and you scroll down to the specific information about the book, it'll tell you who the publisher is. And if the publisher is the author, then that's a self-published, independently published book. Or it may be some publisher you've never heard of before. There are a lot of really small presses out there. So, at that point, I guess you could research that publisher to see if you think they have any kind of, standards as far as the quality of the authors they publish and what those standards are. Now, if it's one of, the big publishers, then you have a good idea of kind of what their standards are. This person can at least write coherent sentences and put them together into paragraphs that make sense and all that kind of thing. So I am not saying here that if the source of your information is a self-published author, that they don't know what they're talking about, whether it's about the topic they wrote about or whether it's about writing in general or whatever. I'm not saying that. They may know what they're talking about, but my point is they may not. And there's no guarantee that they do. Just keep in mind, just because someone has a book that they've self-published, it doesn't mean that book's any good. It doesn't mean that they're a good writer. It doesn't mean that anyone's actually buying that book. It doesn't mean that people enjoy reading it. It certainly doesn't mean that they're an expert by any means. Now, even if someone is published by a publisher that you do recognize, it still doesn't necessarily mean that they know what they're talking about, right? Like they could still be not a great writer in your opinion, or they don't really know about the topic that they're talking about. But at least you can have a little bit more confidence that at the very least, they can write to a certain level of skill if they're published by a publisher that you recognize. So not only is it important to ask, what is the source of this information that I'm being presented, to avoid misinformation, but you also want to get as close to the source of that information as possible. So for instance, I talk a lot about Stephen King's book On Writing and things that I've learned from it as a writer. So it would be way better for you to read On Writing yourself than it would be for you to just listen to me talk about what I learned from it and go with that, right? Because I read the book that Stephen King wrote, and now I'm telling you what I got from it. And, it's possible that if you go and read the book, you might read the exact same paragraph I read and get something totally different from it. Maybe I misunderstood something that I read. Maybe I thought Stephen King said something that he didn't actually say. So it'd be much better to find the source, right? Get as close to the source as you can. If you want to know what Stephen King has to say about writing, it's much better to find an interview with Stephen King himself than it is to watch a video about someone else talking about what Stephen King supposedly said and what he meant by what he said. So you might be thinking right now, wait a minute, Lex, you spend a lot of time in this show talking about what you learned from Stephen King or what you learned from Brandon Sanderson or what you learned from some book you read. Are you basically telling us that we shouldn't listen to you and that listening to this podcast is a total waste of our time? Well, not necessarily. That's not really what I'm saying. My goal with those things, like when I talk to you about On Writing, my goal is not to take the place of Stephen King and to take the place of On Writing and to give you the information and now you're good to go. My goal is to whet your appetite so that you realize that, hey, this book On Writing probably has some really good information in it for me. I'm going to go read that or go listen to it. That's my goal. So that's why I'm not going to sit here and read the entire book to you and give you commentary, because that's not what I want. Like, I don't want you to take my word for it. I've been like that in all my podcasts. Those of you that listen to the hundreds of episodes of my gaming podcasts probably know I've said it numerous times that, I never want people to just believe me and take my word for it and just take it to the bank. I want people to learn for themselves, so I want you to go read On Writing for yourself and get whatever you can get out of it. My purpose is really just to let you know that this book exists and some things I've learned from it in the hopes that you'll go check it out. So yeah, the source of the information, getting as close to that as possible is really important. In history, you'll often talk about the quality of a source. We talk about this in anthropology too. So you have primary, secondary, and tertiary sources. So, history is a really great way to illustrate this. So a primary source would be an actual historical document. So if we're talking about, say, the Civil War in the United States, primary sources would be actual documents that were written during the Civil War, letters, newspaper articles, journals, etc. A secondary source is a document or book written by someone who has themselves researched primary sources. So this could be a book written by a historian who's pored over a lot of primary sources, historical documents from, say, the Civil War, and has written a book about what they've learned. So that's a secondary source. Then a tertiary source is a source written by someone who has researched secondary sources. So this is actually what your high school history textbook was. It was a tertiary source. So the people that wrote your high school textbook, your high school history textbook, did not themselves go read historical documents. They read books read by historians, and that's where their information came from, usually for the most part. So, if you're researching something, the closer you get to a primary source, the more accurate the information is going to be. Because at each of those levels, there's interpretation done, right? So as soon as you sit down to read, say, a letter from the Civil War, you are bringing your own bias into that, and you are interpreting what you read, and your what you come away with from that letter may not be 100% accurate based on what the letter actually says, because you kind of see it through your own lens. Now you go and write a book about what you learned from that letter, and now someone else comes and reads the book that you wrote. So now, not only is there your bias that you had when you read the book based on how you interpreted the letter that you read, but now there's another level of bias because the person reading the book that you read has their own interpretation of your interpretation, right? And then you go into a tertiary source and there's yet another layer of bias and potential misinformation. So it's a lot like the game of telephone that we played as kids. The farther you get from the primary source of the information, the more times that message is passed from person to person, the more misinformation creeps in, the more details are lost or remembered incorrectly, and the less reliable the information becomes. Now, some of this is unintentional. It just happens without us meaning to, unconscious bias, misunderstanding the information we're presented, things like that. And then some of it is also intentional sometimes. Sometimes people consciously have a bias or an agenda that they're trying to promote, and so they will twist things to fit that intentionally. But at the end of the day, whether it's conscious or unconscious or a combination of the two, the result is still that the information is not as reliable as it was closer to the source. So whether you're trying to get information on writing, publishing, getting an agent, or you're doing research for your story, you always want to get as close to a primary source as you can. So, if you're really interested in a certain writer and how they do what they do, like say Stephen King, you are much better off finding a talk that Stephen King himself gave or reading a book that Stephen King himself wrote about what he does than you would be finding someone else who has heard what Stephen King has to say and is now passing it on to you. So if this kind of thing interests you, if you find this fascinating like I do, and you'd like to dig a little deeper, I highly recommend a recent episode of the podcast Big Picture Science, which is put out by the SETI Institute. The episode was called Skeptic Check, Do Your Own Research. I'll have it linked in the show notes at lexstarwalker.com/LOL. So this episode is really about the this kind of fad now of people, quote, doing their own research and challenging scientific and medical experts based on, doing a weekend of, quote, research on the internet, which, by the way, that's not research. That's reading summaries of other people's research, maybe, but it's not doing your own research. So, yeah, there's this thing now and you may have seen this in the news or whatever, where someone will do some, quote, research online in, a few hours or a few days or a few weeks or whatever. And now they think that they're qualified to challenge an expert in the field who's had formal training and done plenty of their own research and experiments and have years, if not decades of experience, which, when you think about it like that, it's pretty ridiculous, but people do this. So that's not exactly what I've been talking about today, but it is related, and it is a really interesting episode and really makes you think about, the quality of the information you get and where is it coming from and how much can you trust it. And it's a really fascinating episode, and I highly recommend it if you want to check it out. All right. Well, that is going to wrap it up for episode 52 of Lex Out Loud Writing Science Fiction. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the topic. Hope you found it educational. And hopefully in the future, you will do your due diligence when you're doing research, and you will avoid all those pitfalls that are out there, especially online, of misinformation. If you would like to reach me, you can email me at lexoutloudpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter at LexStarWalker, and you can call my voicemail, 951-465-5391. You can also join our community on Discord. You can find a link to that in the show notes at lexstarwalker.com/LOL. If you'd like to support the show and what I'm doing, you could become a patron. There's a link to my Patreon in the show notes as well. You can also check out my support page on the website, and there are quite a few other ways that you can help me out above and beyond becoming a patron, or instead of becoming a patron, if that's not the kind of thing you want to do. But I appreciate everyone who patronizes the show and helps me keep this going. Could not do it without you. And really appreciate everyone listening and joining me on this exciting journey. So that's going to wrap it up for this week. Thank you again so much. I will be back soon with another episode. And until then, keep writing.